Jill, what do you make of what you've just heard from Tricia about when they hear how government was functioning, their natural reaction?
I think it's a very natural reaction. It's an appalling picture of people who, after all, being paid by all of us to run government effectively on our behalf, and the fact that relationships are so bad that a lot of the time people in number 10 seem to be trying to manage around and manage out the Prime Minister because they think that things will be even worse if they do involve the Prime Minister, is a sort of condemnation of the whole system. The fact that, you know, people are so complacent, think things are going okay when there is mounting evidence that it isn't. And the fact, and I think Lee Keynes said this, that in a sense you can forgive some of the misdecisions in the first wave, but then the second lockdown and the chaos around that really is unforgivable. Because as Tricia was just saying, they should have learnt lessons from what they did wrong in March to make sure there wasn't a repeat, and yet we had that repeat in the autumn.
Right, but you've been around government for a long time. I mean, is what you're hearing unique to that government, or, you know, do people like that exist in government normally?
I think that, obviously, as Dominic Cummings said, this was a crisis on a scale that nobody who'd been in government in the previous 50, 60 years had to confront. So aim off for that. But I don't think that any government I ever worked in would have had that level of appalling language about people you were supposed to be working as professionals with. And I think anyone who works in any normal workplace will be pretty shocked by the fact that people, and including civil servants, not just the political advisors, were pinging messages, just, you know, denigrating their colleagues to such an extent that the idea that people could be working together productively, I mean, the fact that Dominic Cummings' defence against that message about Helen McNamara was, well, I was even ruder about the men. I mean, it's just an appalling culture to be working in. And
but
I think
not normal is the point.
It's not normal.
Within government.
It's not normal, and it's not normal anywhere else. You know, I mean, government's not an exception to that.
Now, Tricia also pointed out the lack of diversity, and that was the big problem. You had a load of people who basically thought the same way, looked the same way, came from the same sort of backgrounds, thinking the same sorts of things. That's a massive structural problem for government, isn't it?
Well, the government is aware that it needs to do something about diversity, even though ministers now are sort of rowing back on diversity initiatives. But it's pretty clear at the time that if you're going to have basically a lot of white blokes who, you know, live in nice houses with gardens, you know, are they able to empathise with somebody, you know, on benefits in a low-paid role, having to go into work with kids who are home from school in a flat? You know, it was always going to be a problem, and, you know, it seemed early on that actually the government should have been alive enough to think we need to be thinking not just about people like us who actually have it relatively easy through COVID. We need to be thinking about the people who really are having a really difficult time, and put ourselves in their shoes and ask, how do we make policies that work for them, not just for people like us? And I think that was a very clear failure throughout.
Okay. Tricia, let me come to you finally. I mean, if you had more than the two questions, what would you be getting at that you feel is not being got at by this inquiry?
The total lack of accountability. Total lack of accountability. So when Lee Keynes is being cross-examined, he remembers dates, times, everything. But every time a question came to him, and there were quite a few, about his response to a certain thing that had been really heavily negative, he would say, in all honesty, I'm not quite sure, or in all honesty, I can't remember. He remembered everything else. And I thought that just was symbolic of the whole enterprise. Total lack of accountability. They need to be held accountable, totally, and it's not happening.
Tricia Barnett, Jill Rutter, thank you both very much indeed.